I remember the night as if it were stitched into my skin. Her name was Rachel Monroe, 23, a nursing student in Ohio. She wasn't famous, she wasn't wealthy, and maybe that's why what happened barely made the news. At 10:41 p.m., Rachel called her brother, Daniel. The words were ordinary. Just checking in, just promising she'd be home after her late shift. But Daniel swears the voice wasn't hers. He said it sounded like Rachel. And yet, something was off. Pause between syllables. A breathing pattern he didn't recognize. Like someone was imitating her too perfectly. Rachel never made it home. And that single phone call, her last call, has haunted her family for years. Because if it wasn't her voice, then who was pretending to be Rachel Monroe? I'll never forget the look on Linda Carter's face when she spoke about her daughter. Linda wasn't Rachel's mother. She was just a woman from the same small town in Ohio. Someone who understood the kind of silence that follows after the phone stops ringing. Her own daughter, Amber Carter, had vanished 2 years earlier. Different street, different night, but the same kind of vanishing act that left no footprints to follow. Linda said the worst part wasn't the absence. It was the memory of a half-finished sentence. Amber's last words, cut off in static, as if someone else had taken the phone mid-call. 2 young women, 2 families, both haunted by voices that didn't match. And now, in this quiet Midwestern town, a chilling question had begun to spread like wildfire. Was someone collecting their daughter's voices before erasing them? I met Sheriff Thomas Keene the following week, a man worn thin by years of chasing shadows across rural Ohio. His voice carried the weight of unsolved nights, but this time, his hands shook as he set a single envelope on the table. It hadn't come through official channels. No police delivery, no evidence locker tag. It arrived in his personal mailbox, no return address. Inside was a cassette tape, old, dusty, unlabeled. But when he pressed play, the static bled into something unmistakable. 2 voices back to back. The first was Rachel Monroe. The second was Amber Carter. Not their laughter, not their conversations, just fragments of unfinished sentences, stitched together like someone was rearranging their last words into a script. Sheriff Keene stared at me and whispered, "Whoever sent this, they don't want an arrest. They want an audience." It was Michael Bennett, Amber's uncle, who first caught what no one else had noticed. He wasn't an investigator, not even close. Just a mechanic who spent nights in his garage with an old radio humming in the background. But when Sheriff Keene played the cassette for the families, Michael leaned forward, his face drained of color. He heard something the rest of us missed. Not the girls, not their fractured words. A sound buried beneath their voices. Steady, deliberate. A low whistle. The kind you hear when someone works with their hands. A tune so ordinary it should have meant nothing. Except Michael had heard it before. From the man who lived across the street. The neighbor who never missed a chance to wave. The neighbor who always whistled while fixing his porch at night. And Michael whispered what no one wanted to believe. That's him. That's Frank Doyle. It wasn't police who first questioned Frank Doyle. It was Caroline Harris, the mail carrier who'd walked his street for 15 years. She said Frank was the kind of neighbor people leaned on. The man who shoveled driveways in winter, the man who left lemonade out in July. But Caroline remembered something others brushed aside. Every afternoon, Frank waited at the door for his mail. Every afternoon, without fail. And if the letter wasn't addressed to him, he grew tense. Like he couldn't stand the idea of someone else's name crossing his path. One day, she caught a glimpse through the crack of his front door. Not the living room, not the kitchen. A narrow hallway leading to a locked room. The walls were covered in soundproofing foam. Caroline never spoke of it until the cassette appeared. And now her voice trembled as she asked the question no one could shake. Why does a man like Frank Doyle need a room built to swallow sound? The warrant came 3 days later. I stood beside Deputy Laura Mitchell, a woman who'd seen her share of drug busts and burglaries, but never anything like this. She said Doyle's house smelled ordinary, like coffee grounds and old carpet. Nothing screamed danger, until they reached the locked door. Doyle's hands shook as he produced the key, but his voice stayed steady. almost rehearsed. "It's just storage," he muttered. When the door swung open, the silence was crushing. The walls thick with foam. The floor bare except for a single chair bolted to concrete. And on the chair, a reel-to-reel recorder. Deputy Mitchell pressed play. The machine hissed, then spilled fragments of voices. Rachel, Amber, and dozens more. None of them finished their sentences. None of them ever reached goodbye. But at the very end of the tape, a voice neither family recognized broke the pattern. A man's voice, calm, patient. "This one stays with me. I'll never forget the day Judge Eleanor Briggs stood in the packed courthouse. She listened as prosecutors painted Frank Doyle as the predator who stole voices and lives. The evidence, the chair, the tapes, the soundproofed room, was enough to drown him in suspicion. But the trial twisted in ways no one expected. Forensic experts revealed the male voice at the end of the last recording didn't belong to Doyle. It belonged to someone younger, someone with no record. It belonged to Doyle's own son, Christopher Doyle, a name the town barely knew. Neighbors remembered a quiet boy who shadowed his father, never speaking in public. And yet, on tape, his voice was calm, steady, in control. Frank Doyle took the blame, shoulders heavy, eyes resigned. But as deputies led him away, Judge Briggs whispered to reporters, "We may have locked up the wrong Doyle." And somewhere out there, Christopher's silence still lingers, like a shadow waiting for its turn. Because sometimes, the scariest truth isn't the man in chains, it's the one who walks free. Subscribe to the Veil of Secret because the story never ends when the gavel drops.